Hi everyone, good morning. Good afternoon, I think. It's already 4, so let's start our lecture. Can you guys hear me? Okay, so a little bit about me. Um, my name is Rui Zhu. I'm currently a postdoctoral researcher at Texas A&M University. I earned my bachelor degrees and master degrees in landscape architectures and PhDs in urban and regional science. I will be leading this class until the last 3 weeks, after which professors Cecily Giusti will take over. And regarding the assignment, it will be released soon, I believe. The professor Giusti mentioned that due to a technical issue, the assignment has been postponed. Once it's available, she will make an announcement to inform you. So, okay, today we are going to dive into the Industrial Revolution. I believe the professors have already covered the pre-cities to early cities economies in the previous sessions. Now we will build
Mhm.
on that foundations and explore how industrialization shaped our development. So on Canvas in module 4, I have uploaded two readings to further support your understandings of this week content. So I highly recommend that you read them. I will not supervise whether you are reading them, but I strongly encourage it. Okay, let me share my screen. I will close my video. Okay, can everybody see my screen right now? I assume you can see my screen.
Yes,
Okay, thank you.
yes, I can.
Okay, so let's now dive into how the Industrial Revolutions and the rise of the automobile further reshaped our cities and our ways of life. So the Industrial Revolutions was a period of major mechanizations and the innovations that begins in Great Britain during the mid-18th and early 19th centuries. And late, it moved across the European with the countries like France and Germany, and then it crossed the Atlantic to the United States. After that, it continued to spread to other parts of the world, including Japan's. Eventually, the revolution's impact reached even more distant part of the globe. During these times, we saw the tremendous advance in productions, manufacturing, and various fields of engineering, particularly between the late 18th centuries and the mid 19th century. This advancement didn't just change the industries, they transformed the entire societies. So let's focus on exploring the rise of the industries in the United States and its impact on small businesses. So in the 1790s, the United States was mostly a nation of families, farms. and independent artists. And these small businesses were largely self-sufficient, supporting local communities with some goods and services. The process of industrialization in the United States began to take off around the time of the Civil War. The rapid growth of the railroad across the nation, coupled with the increasing supplies provided by mechanized agriculture, provided a base for the development of industries and the resultant rise of the cities and the mass urban labor force. From around 1840 to the early 1940s, industry consistently grows as a portion of American labor force. If you are interested in this topic, I recommend The Visible Hand. This book explores the development of modern business enterprises in the United States from the 90s to the 20th century. There are some examples of how transformative this period was. So let's look at 1880. You can say a young man named James Stark was just about to launch a new businesses in the tobacco industry, focusing on ready rolled cigarettes. And back then, skilled workers could hand roll around 3,000 cigarettes a day. But when machines came into play, that numbers shot up to like 120,000 cigarettes a day. Similarly, during this time, matches were being produced on a massive scale. They were being made by the billions and packed into boxes. Advertising really took off with newspapers and magazines in the 16th and the 17th centuries. So in the United States, after 1870, advertising exploded as industrialization flooded the market with products. To sell them, the industries had to turn workers into customers. So they developed the mass marketing strategies. By the 1880s, advertising spending was about 200 million, and by the 1920s, it had jumped to nearly 3 billion. To keep up with this blooming industry, there was a massive wave of city building. This growth added to all the trending cities in the East, like Philadelphia and New York, and lead to the rise of new interior cities like Detroit, Chicago, and St. Louis. The city's buildings process continued through the late of 19th and early 20th centuries. In 1800s, most Americans were still living in rural areas, with only about 6% in cities. Fast forward to 1900, and that the numbers had jumped to the 40% living in cities. So this period marked the beginnings of the significant rise in Americans' urbanization. As more people started living in urban areas, it led to significant increase in urban population densities during the 19th century. This was a time of the rapid urbanizations as people left rural areas and moved to cities, looking for work in factories and other industries. As the cities grow denser, they become the hub of the economic activities. So these photos capture the bustling, crowded natures of urban life at that time. In 1925, the Lewis introduced the concept of urbanism as a way of life. This was closely tied to the changes brought by industrialization. I have mentioned about this. I think the professors Joseph about mentions this when we talk about what is a city, and he defined the key characteristics and distinct features of the urban living. He defined the urban areas by them's large, dense populations, which drew people due to the need of the large workforce. Cities also become diverse with peoples from various cultures, ethnics, and social backgrounds. This diversity was largely due to the migrations and the influx of the workers seeking jobs. High population densities shaped social interactions and the physical structure of the city. He also noted that the urban settings, the traditional family structured weakened, replaced by more fragmented and individualized social connection. The social interactions in cities were more impersonal and compared to the close-knit tie found in rural areas. Industrializations indeed brought a lot of benefits. It's created more jobs like factories spread, increasing the demand for managers and workers, which boosted a job availabilities and wages. It also led to economic growth by increasing productions and efficiency, making goods more affordable and accessible to more people. For many, the industrialization improved the standard of living with a better life, access to new products, and improved service. And in this period, we also saw some major technological advancement such as X-rays and calculator. Although there were a lot of advancement during the Industrial Revolutions, the rapid progress caused many problems. This shaped sharp increase in the number of the factories caused an increase in urban pollution. The pollution wasn't contained only in the factories. As people move to the cities, the living conditions becomes deplorable as the urban resources were overwhelmed. You can see the sewage flowed in the street in some cities, and the manufacturers dumped waste from factories into rivers. Water supplies were not tested and protected, which eventually is a need to regulations and laws being enacted. The deteriorations of workings and living conditions during these industrial revolutions had a serious consequences. So the harsh working environment leads to a range of the health problems among factory workers, which in turn fueled the rise of the labor movement in the United States. As more people came to cities, the demand for cheap housing increased, leading to the constructions of the poorly built homes. This kind of homes often lacked proper sanitation, making personal hygiene difficult and contributing to the overall declines in living conditions. As these conditions was worst, several key workers' right issue emerged. So first, the long hours becomes the norm. The workers enduring the grueling shifts for the inadequate pace to barely any breaks. Second, the child labors become a significant issue during this period, with many children being forced to work in dangerous and unhealthy environment. So now let's take a moment to watch a videos to explore the harsh realities of the children labors in the early 1900s. Can you guys see my screen right now?
Oh, no.
The YouTube video here?
No. They're implementing another work
Yeah,
plan
we can see it.
again. Don't they have better ways to waste our time?
Great. 12 months. In the early 1900s, the general population in those years had very little understanding of what was meant by child labor and child exploitation. The kinds of jobs you would find children working in ranged from the mines, the factories, the cotton mills, to working out on the streets selling newspapers. Injuries, even deaths, were very common among children. The parents would often say that they needed the income that their children brought in, that was what allowed them to continue to survive. A number of parents were advocates for child labor, and their children thought that that was the way life worked. One of the first things the National Child Labor Committee did was to hire a photographer. They hired Louis Hine, who was then their photographer for the next 2 decades. They sent him around the country to identify, find, and photograph children in exploitative situations. He promoted himself as a Bible salesman. He said he was bringing his camera along so he could photograph kids reading Bibles. A boy would say he was 13 when in fact he was 11, or a girl would say she was 12 when in fact she might be 9. The photograph is of a young girl, 10 or 11 years old. Her name was Sadie Piper, at a cotton mill in Lancaster, South Carolina. She's standing in front of a large loom on a long hallway, staring at and working hard on the job of selecting the quality products. She's probably worked most of the night. It's nearing the end of her shift. She stands there, iconic, as a representative of hundreds of other girls who are being treated just like her and who have no choice. That photograph raised the consciousness immediately. You see that photograph and you cannot look away from it. It doesn't say America. Stark photographs influenced legislation over a period of roughly 35 years. This body of work on child labor represented how he thought and how he felt that children must not be exploited. He represents the most important photographer in terms of social advocacy and social change in the first half of the 20th century.
Okay, after watching these videos, you saw that in that period, the child labors was common, with kids working in dangerous jobs like factories and mines. Families often relies on the incomes and children brought in, making child labors seems normal. Let's take a look at how those conditions sparked the labor movement. So let's look at another video here.
So what is ClickUp? ClickUp is an all-in-one productivity software where you can manage everything and anything related to your work. Your document.
To most of us, Labor Day means time off from work, maybe a barbecue to mark the official end of summer. But how much do you know about what inspired its creation? The labor movement. The labor movement started around the Industrial Revolution, a time in the late 19th century when America exploded in size and wealth. Advances in technology created manufacturing jobs, and people moved to cities to work in factories. But it wasn't the workers getting rich. It was their bosses who raked in big profits by paying low wages for long hours. Fed up with big business, industrial workers created unions to fight for better conditions. Unions are the backbone of the labor movement. But what exactly did they accomplish? Well, for one, you can thank the labor movement for your work-free weekend. In the late 1800s, the average American worked as much as 100 hours a week. Unions held strikes to demand shorter work weeks and an 8-hour workday to make time for family and relaxation. The most famous strike, the Haymarket Riots, happened in Chicago on May 1st, 1886, with thousands of people taking to the streets, and their voices only grew louder from there. The labor movement also protested child labor. Remember those black and white photos of children with dirty, sad faces wearing overalls and beanie caps? Those kids weren't playing outside, but they were working in factories. In 1881, unions demanded that businesses stop hiring kids under 14. And slowly but surely, measures against child labor caught on around the country. Eventually, all those protests got results. In 1938, Congress passed a law called the Fair Labor Standards Act, which set the 40-hour work week, regulated child labor, and set standards for minimum wage and overtime pay. In the 1930s and 1940s, workers were also able to negotiate health benefit plans from their employers. Though union membership is on a decline today, it's undeniable that the labor movement forever changed the way Americans live, work, and even relax.
Okay, let's back to the lecture. So after watching this, we really need to thank the labor movement for fighting for shorter work weeks, better pace, and the end of the child labor. The efforts need to the protections and standards we have today. Okay, the industrializations also paved the way for the mass productions of automobiles, which significantly shaped the evolution of the cities to accommodate this new mode of the transportation. So let's explore how cars change the city. The first practical automobiles begins appears in the 1880s and the 1890s, where the numbers of cars was very limited during the 19th centuries. Since presence marked the beginnings of a shift away from the horse-drawn heritage bicycles and walkings as a primary means of the transportation. This image shows the Mulberry Street in New York City around 1900, provides a snapshot of urban life at a times when cities were just beginning to feel the early influence of the automobile. So during this time, the Mulberry Street and other urban areas were still dominated by pedestrian traffic. When cars were first introduced in the late 19th centuries, even though there wasn't many of them yet, they started to bring about some challenges and potential problems for cities. The introduction of the cars led to an increase in road accidents as cities were unprepared for the integrations of automobiles into the existing traffic system. So the pedestrians were particularly vulnerable to collisions with cars. During the 1920s, cars had become a lot more common in American cities, and this led to a rise in traffic accidents. So as a result, cities like St. Louis and Baltimore quickly realized they needed a better traffic management and safety methods. So both cities were involved in early efforts to raise public awareness about the traffic safety. So for examples, in 1923, the St. Louis Star reported on the growing dangers of unregulated traffic and the need of safety rules. The Baltimore launched a campaign called No Accident Week, which aims to reduce traffic accidents by encouraging safe driving and pedestrian behavior. This was a part of a board's efforts to get everyone on board with improving safety on the road. As cities deals with the challenges that comes with the rise of automobiles, the designs and structures of the urban environment started to change, especially it comes to block lanes and intersections. So to understand how different this was, let's take a look at the ancient cities of Rome. So unlike cities that were later influenced by cars. The roads wasn't designed with the automobiles in mind. So instead, it had a network of streets with irregular block lanes. So unlike the grid patterns you might see in modern cities, Romans blocks varied greatly in size and shape. This was often because of the city's topographies, existing structures, or historical land use. So as cities grows organically, the street layout become less uniform, with some areas having longer blocks and others featuring much shorter irregularly shaped blocks. And its street network also had a high densities of intersections, especially in the central areas. So this dense network make it easier for people to get around on foot, which was essential in a cities where walking was the primary way to move around. So now let's look at the woodlands, amongst the planned communities located north of Houston, Texas. So this is great examples of modern suburban design. So in the woodlands, you will notice the longer blocks and the fewer intersections compared to the older urban design. So this layout is specifically designed to support a modern car-dependent suburban lifestyle, where privacies and environmental preservations are prioritized. This reflects the shift in urban planning's principles that cater to the needs and desires of suburbans living today. So let's put it all together by comparing those two different urban design. The street network of Rome and the woodland represent two different approaches to urban design. So the old cities shorter blocks and high intersection densities fostered connectivities, social interactions, and commercial activities, reflecting the needs of an ancient, densely populated city. And in contrast, the woodland, the longer blocks and the lower intersection densities are designed to support modern car-dependent suburban lifestyle. So this difference highlights the evolution of urban planning from the dense pedestrian-oriented cities of the ancient world to the sprawl automobiles-oriented suburbans of today. Let's take a look at a timeline that highlights how street network in the United States have evolved over key periods. So in the early days, American settlements developed organically, similar to what we saw in Rome. Streets were often very narrow, widens, and irregular. By the 1920s, as cars become more common, cities started making changes. At that time, streets were more open, traffic signals were introduced, and the parking space were created. Even though the grid patterns was still dominating, these adjustments were made to handle the growing traffic. And then moving into the 1950s, during the post-war suburban boom, we saw the rise of the cul-de-sacs and looped streets in the suburban neighborhood. These designs prioritized the residential's privacy and safeties over connectivities. So this lead to isolated, car-dependent communities. By the 1970s, suburbanization continued, and we saw even more cul-de-sac heavy neighborhoods. This makes cars even more essential for getting around. After the 1920s, as the street networks in the US continued to evolve, we saw an increasing emphasis on designing roads and neighborhoods that catered to cars. This trend reached very important moment in the 1940s with the passage of the Highway Act of 1956. This legislations marked a major turning point in Americans' infrastructures, as it authorized the creations of the interstate highway system. The system provided extensive and high-capacity roads designed for cars and trucks. It makes long-distance driving more accessible and convenient. This shift further connected cities and states and encouraged even greater reliance on cars over other forms of the transportation, such as trains or buses. The Highway Act didn't just change how Americans traveled. It also had a profound impact on where they choose to live. So with the constructions of highways, it becomes much easier for people to live further away from city centers where still being able to commute to work by car. So this accessibility facilitated the rapid growth of suburbans, and this is how car-dependent communities begin to develop. Where the rise of the suburbans offers new living opportunities for many Americans, it wasn't an inclusive development. Some suburban neighborhoods were like designed to exclude the African Americans and other minorities. One of the most significant barriers was practice known as redlining. So redlining involves banks, insurance companies, and other financial institutions refusing for limiting the loans, mortgage, and other financial services to certain areas, particularly those with a significant minority population. So this discriminatory practice effectively prevented non-white families from purchasing homes in many suburban communities. So this lead to racial segregations and economic disparities. And I found a video that provide backgrounds on the histories um, and impacts of the redlinings. So let's look at the video.
In every way imaginable, the consequences of redlining to many Black and brown communities across America meant that those communities had the least and the last of everything. To talk about redlining, because this is a term you may have heard, but most people don't actually know the history. In 1933, in the midst of America's Great Depression, when unemployment rates were 25% and millions of people were not only out of work, but many of them were houseless, the federal government, under President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, established an agency called the Homeowners Loan Corporation. Basically, it tried to make home buying much more affordable by subsidizing the cost of building and lending such that people would be able to afford to buy for the first time. Millions of Americans participated, except that when the Homeowners Loan Corporation began to issue mortgages, it came up with a scheme to decide which communities were deserving of loans and which ones weren't. They made maps and used a color-coded scheme. Green meant this was a community that you could lend to, and red meant you could not. The basic decision they made was to determine that any community with the presence of Black people or brown people or people who perhaps spoke Italian in certain parts of the country could not receive support from the Homeowners Loan Corporation. This created a system that came to be known as redlining, because communities that were deemed risky by the mere presence of people of color, most especially Black people, were disqualified from getting direct support from the federal government to purchase homes. This policy lasted until 1968, when the federal government passed the Fair Housing Act, which made other forms of discrimination in the buying and selling or renting of homes illegal. But the truth is that the legacies of redlining from that moment to the present meant that Black people were subjected to other forms of exploitative lending. A system called contract buying grew up as a way to sell Black people homes on a layaway plan. You made set payments over an extended period of time, but you never owned the home until the very last payment. It was very common for unscrupulous sellers to withhold that final payment in an effort to take back the home from a person who had worked incredibly hard to buy it. Home ownership has been the most important asset that a typical white family has in order to do simple things like borrow money to send a child to college. Most importantly, they have financial freedom. But for communities that have been subjected to redlining, they didn't have those advantages. Not only that, the very communities that they lived in suffered from divestment, including the lack of grocery stores, the lack of businesses, the imposition of federal highways that often bisected their communities. In every way imaginable, the consequences of redlining to many Black and brown communities across America meant that those communities had the least and the last of everything. And to this day, the median wages and income of those communities and the financial insecurity that people who live in redline communities face has long-term health consequences for families, has educational consequences for young people whose schools often don't have the tax basis to give them the same resources that communities that were never redlined actually have.
Okay, this video showed how redlines systematically excluded Black and brown communities from receiving home loans. Even after redlines was banned in 1968, these communities were left with fewer resources, poor schools, and the economic hardships that continue today. So this practice didn't just limit the housing opportunities, it create lasting inequities. Now, we have talked about red lines. Let's dive a bit deeper into tools that made it all possible. The HOLC, which is Homes Owned Loans Corporations, was created in 1933 during the Great Depression to help prevent people from losing their homes. Where that sounds positive, the way they assess neighborhood had some serious lasting consequences. So how did they do it? So HOLC created these detailed maps to figure out where it was safe to lend money. But there's problems. These maps were color coded based on what they thought were good or risky investments, and then criteria were often biased. So look at these pictures. The areas shaded in greens were considered best. This were usually affluent, predominantly white neighborhoods. Blue areas were labeled still desirables. These were safe, but maybe not as rich. Yellow areas were marked as declines, often middle to working class neighborhoods with more minorities moving in. Finally, the red areas were considered hazardous. So these were typically African Americans communities, and this is where the terms red lines comes from. Because of these maps, the neighborhood labeled in red were often denied loans. So people in these communities nearly impossible to buy homes or invest in them properties. So this practice didn't just affect individual families; it's contributed to racial segregations and the that still like exists today. Okay, now as today we covered the industrial cities, and tomorrow's at 4 we will talk about the post-industrial cities. So do you guys have any questions for today's class? If you don't have questions, we will see each other's tomorrow.
Thank you.
Thank you. So let's close. Okay, see you guys.